A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's, flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Casella-Brookins. Each episode, we look at speculative fiction, defined broadly, and we ask critics, scholars, writers, and other readers to point out the jagged parts, the good bits, the threads that run out elsewhere in the world or in the field. Today, we are talking about the 2025 Hugo shortlist, mostly the fiction part, the novel and the novella, and our guest is Roseanna Pendlebury. This is Roseanna's third time on A Meal of Thorns. She's a frequent contributor to the Ancillary Review of Books, a contributor and editor at the Hugo and Ignite winning Nerds of a Feather, and blogs at Reader of Else. Roseanna, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. Clearly you're not sick of me yet.
No. How are you doing today? I know we were talking about this before, but...
Yeah, pretty good. I very much in the trenches of award shortlists because it's not just the Hugo, it's the Clark at the moment as well. But in a good way. I love awards season, so I'm happy.
The Clark list is so good this year. I had been approached about potentially doing a Clark episode, and I'm like, there's just not enough turnaround to read them all and record and edit like in the list. Next year I'm going to shoot for it, but...
Oh, yes. I think that'd be fascinating. I love the Clark.
Yeah, that's a really cool award. But yeah, before we dive into stuff today, and I'm gonna read a little bit before we get going. Anything else you wanted to note in terms of anything particularly good you've been reading that jumps out, or something interesting you've been working on?
In things I've read recently, I read my first Jeff Ryman book, which I enjoyed is not the right word because it was really horrifying. It's a horror book. It was quite horrifying, but it was very effectively horrifying. And it has made me want to pick up everything else he's ever written. So
nice.
That was pretty fun. And I also recently finished Colourfields by Paul Kincaid, which
cool.
I also really enjoyed.
I haven't got a copy of that yet. I feel like I ordered one, but I was enjoying the review and the meta review and the meta review going back and forth online with you and Paul and some other folks talking about. I'm just really fascinated by that because the way we approach science fiction critically and sort of independent scholarly, if that makes sense, is so idiosyncratic and so personal to our own experience of it. It was really cool to read those two opposite, or not opposite, but just two very different paths through the genre.
Yeah, it was fun to write because it wasn't something I'd have thought about. Neil Harrison prompted me to do it, and then I did it, and I was like, oh, actually, no, that was a really interesting exercise. But just as a contrast to other people's, it's been really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. No, that was really cool. It's made me want to go back and like write up some of my own kind of like early memories because I've been thinking a lot about the way that, I often talk about like the first time I encountered something or I think about my early experiences, but that's also one of those things where I would want to fact check that. Like, right, if I were doing a biography of myself, I'd be like, wait, did I really read that in my teens or am I like conflating that memory? Like go and think about what I actually read when and try to place some of it more years wise. Cause I think a few things have probably like loomed larger in my mind, just the way memory works, that I read them later and think I read them earlier, or maybe things I read really early and didn't remember and I should come back to. So I've been thinking about that.
I would be really keen to read that.
Yeah.
So I think you should definitely do it in all the free time that you definitely have.
Yes. I think all readers should keep their own little like journal going. So I had this is like I don't know if this memory is mine to share, so I might edit this out. When my wife's grandmother passed away, and they were going through her things, she had like all these stacks of books and she would reread a lot. And she kept notes. She would write them. I think she wrote them on like index cards in the back. And she would just write like one line reviews. But sometimes they would be things like, they'd be like 1963, pretty good. And then the next line would say like 1978. Don't remember reading this. Still pretty good. Like things like that. And I thought that was such a cool way to like, I don't know, just have this record of what you've done.
And really cool to find like one of someone that you know quite well and being like connecting to them if you got to read the book and then the note, and that's a really nice connective thing.
I think that's, well, I love marginalia and I love like little like notes from previous readers, so that's fun. But let's dive into the Hugos. Let's jump into this. So before we get into this, I want to kind of give 2.5 notes for listeners. So first off, if you're listening to this episode and you don't know what the Hugos are, welcome. I'm mildly envious of you, but welcome. The Hugo Awards are for science fiction and fantasy and its fandom. They are given every year at Worldcon, which is a big convention that moves to a different location every year. And the awards are nominated and voted on by members of that convention, the World Science Fiction Society. So there's currently 18 awards, if I'm counting right. And they include things, we won't be talking about this episode. They include films, artists, television, editors, lots of fan categories. We're just going to focus on novel and novella. So that's kind of broadly what the Hugos are. And again, if you're not super familiar with them, they're considered among the more prestigious awards that can go to science fiction and fantasy, specifically books. The novels that get that they tend to get kind of flagged in libraries and bookstores. They tend to have more reprints, last longer. That's probably like a debatable and an empirical question of how much they actually boost a work in terms of sales or staying in print or being adapted or things like that. But everyone tends to agree they're fairly important. The other thing, that was point 1. So point 2 and maybe 2.5 here are kind of a disclosure that, first of all, Roseanna is personally on the shortlist for Best Fan Writer this year. Huge congrats, doing jazz hands right now. And A Meal of Thorns is on the list for Fancast, and the Ancillary Review of Books, where I'm an editor and where Roseanna's a contributor, is on for Best Fanzine because we don't have any money changing hands for it, so it counts as a fanzine. So just want to note that it's a little strange to be doing the kind of critical discussion of these works that are what we're going to do, and that's what we're here to do. But I'm just noting that I personally feel a little odd about it and just kind of want to verbalize that because I might be running into some of these people that were going to be saying good and or less good things about their books. And that brings me to the last point, which is that on this podcast and at the Ancillary Review of Books, and I think the two of us personally take criticism very seriously. And so we're going to say some negative things about books if we didn't like them. So if there are things on the novel and novella shortlist that you personally really like and you don't want to hear criticism of and potentially like pretty negative things about it, just go ahead and tune out. Don't feel bad. But if you are interested in what we have to say, both good and bad, stick around. All right. I think that's my disclosures. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that was it.
All right. So we're going to do this. We're going to try our best to keep this to a fairly normal length episode, despite the fact that we are talking about 12 books, plus however many books we bring up that are connected to those 12 books. So we're going to try. We're going to start with a novella. So I'm going to say the list. So the short list is The Brides of High Hill by Niveau, The Butcher of the Forest by Primi Mohammed, Navigational Entanglements by Elietta Bedard, The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain by Sophia Samatar, The Tusks of Extinction by Ray Naylor, and What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. So, Roseanna, first off, big picture impressions. What do you think about the novella shortlist this year?
I mean, you've got to start with the elephant in the room, which is that it is an entirely Tor suite because 5 of them are Tor.com, and then What Feasts at Night is a Nightfire imprint book, which is an imprint of Tor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously Tor have been doing well in awards, in novella awards specifically for a while, but for it to be the entire shortlist it's really quite something. And I'm not saying that as shade on Tor because they publish a very good range of novellas. They publicize them very well. They get good authors. They do a range of stuff. But it definitely, to me, says something about what people are nominating and what people are reading, that it is such a publisher homogenous list.
Yeah, I mean, it's really striking. And so I was going through and looking back at previous years and thinking about novellas. So the novella category has been around, I don't know if since the very beginning, but I believe so. You know, this is one of the oldest categories on here. This is a length and a format that science fiction and fantasy have been paying attention to probably more than mainstream literature and a lot of other genres for a long time.
For sure.
But it's also one that hasn't always had good print presence on shelves. You know, they've also often been like magazine or collections or where they've appeared. And then Tor started running and sort of like putting a lot of editing work and money and publishing and marketing into novellas. And I'm just looking back at the list. It looked like it started around 2015 is when that's when Binti was published by Nnedi Okorafor. And then there are at least, I think, 2 to 3 Tor entries on the list every year since then. Am I right? Was there another sweep a couple years back?
I think there was, yes.
Actually, maybe even 2 sweeps. Yeah, actually, I'm looking at this. Yeah, it looks like 2021 for sure, and 2022. Although 2022, yep, nope, that is all Tor.com as well. So, yeah, it's a weird thing. Like, what to say about it? It's no slant against these books. It's no slant against Tor, but it is kind of concerning in terms of, yeah, what people are reading, what your chances are, because this almost says like if your novella is not with Tor, is anyone reading it? Which is a problem.
I mean, I think for me as well, it also speaks to the continued American domination of the award because
Mm,
tour availability outside the US is patchy at best.
mm,
Like trying to get hold of tour books in the UK is really, really quite hard.
hmm,
I mean, especially novellas even more so. I love the Singing Hills cycle, like Nevo, brilliant. I do not own them in physical copy because they are just so hard to get here.
hmm.
And I think it's kind of speaking to who's who's nominating and how conservative they're being about their reading to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah, I mean it's such a tough one. Like I feel like this is one of those things where I'd love to have more data on that we don't about like who is nominating and how they're nominating. I do feel like generally, so I just, posted recently a thing about I think there should be a Hugo for best translated work, which has led to some conversations about like who's nominating, what works are getting discovered, how would they get on there. And I feel, so this is like an optimistic feeling I have that the people who are really engaged in the nominating process are really engaged with it, like more than the voters in a lot of ways. Just meaning like I see a lot of chatter about what's going on. I see a lot of recommendation lists. There's, Renee's Hugo spreadsheet of doom, which which is a crowdsourced resource where people put in things that are eligible. I see a lot of work on that. So on that sense, like I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the nominating crowd. It seems like there's a lot of stuff out there. However, when those final lists come in, despite years that I've been seeing all this great nominating activity, it often kind of narrows down to these fairly predictable choices and things like the tour predominance. And that makes me think that for all of those people out there who are excited and recommending and reading like a much broader range of stuff, it doesn't take that many people who are sort of like, I don't want to say like low info nominators, but people just like, oh no, yeah, I read these two things and I liked them, I'm going to nominate them. That there's enough of those people that's kind of like washing out the people who are making an effort to read more broadly.
Yeah, and I think which authors are on the novella shortlist kind of backs that up because a lot of them are repeat names.
Mm-hmm.
I think Premi Mohammed is the only one who's never had a Hugo nomination before.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say Sophia Samatar had I think it's a short story nomination rather than for any of her long form work, which I personally think is a crime.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that kind of the low info nominators kind of checks out with the fact that these are all repeat names, and that again, no shade on them. They're
Mm-hmm.
like these are some really great authors,
Mm-hmm.
but they are familiar authors.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I guess the biggest thing is just it's kind of sad because there's so much great stuff out there that more stuff isn't making it on.
Yeah.
But any particular things that you in the Hugo shortlist that lives in your head, what would be on here? Any particular standouts?
A Morning Coat by Alex Jeffers from
Ah,
Ian Hemlock is the one that immediately comes to mind because I've yelled about that all year. I love Neon Hemlock. I think they generally put out bangers, but that one just had a huge emotional punch for me. Likewise, Luna Press novella, The Last to Drown by Lorraine Wilson. Both, again, it's one that was I found very emotionally punchy and tight, and they were both things that felt intrinsically like they were embracing being a novella. And I think the ones on this shortlist that I found didn't work as well for me. And I will say, I don't hate anything on the novella shortlist. I think it
mm-hmm.
has quite a high floor, but I think the ones that didn't work for me felt more like abridged novels than like they
Mm,
were being novellas. So if I want to call one out, Navigational Entanglements for me, it felt like if it had been padded out to a novel, it would have had more emotional heft. It would have felt more like lived in. And I think I found some of the character relationship stuff in it weak because it didn't have the space to breathe.
mm,
Whereas the books that aren't on here that I loved were ones that went, okay, this is a novella. How do we do it tightly and efficiently and like crystallize it down into its purest form?
mm-hmm. No, I agree completely. And something I was noticing reading these was actually, I'll just call it out 'cause I've got them right in front of me here. So, The Butcher of the Forest, The Practice, The Horizon, The Chain, Tusks of Extinction, they all felt very novella-y to me. They kind of felt like they were designed for that format and like worked really well. It's not that the other ones like, didn't work, but the other three, The Brides of High Hill, Navigational Entanglements, and What Feasts at Night, they all felt to me like they work in the context of a novella series.
Yeah.
They felt not episodic, but episodal. Is that a word? Like, these are entries within a larger thing, and that's what a lot of what makes them work. To come back to the de Bedard, which I quite liked, and I liked de Bedard's work a lot. But I was thinking about how much of that worked because I've read a lot of her shorter form and novella science fiction that is playing around with some similar things. And so I was able to kind of slot some of that in there, but it really felt like it kind of relied on that to work for me. Yeah, it almost felt like it totally could be a novel. There's enough there, but the stakes of it were weirdly big for all the time it had to deal with it, because it's dealing with this thing that, right, like this escaped interdimensional creature that could hypothetically like kill like I don't know how many people, lots and lots and lots of people, and this giant political thing that's happening around it. That just felt like a little too big for the format.
Yeah.
Although it was interesting.
On like a similar note, Brides of High Hill, I love that series, but I think I'm quite disappointed that per the rules for best series, it's not actually got the word count yet to count.
I know.
And I would love to see it nominated for best series because I think it works really, really well as a series. But as you say, a lot of what's in it, I think this is one of the ones that worked less well for me in the series because it felt like it was relying so much on what had gone before to make it work.
Yeah, and to drill down a little more specifically, I was just thinking about this format-wise, and also before I say anything negative about Annie Vo book, I want to reiterate that I think like Vo is like hands down one of our strongest writers right now, and her stuff is so good. But I was noticing specifically in the novella structure for this was, so this has a twist in it, but the twist it's not that the twist doesn't make sense, how to say this. So these series, the Singing Hill books, they follow the same protagonist. They kind of build off each other, but they're not like sequentially necessary, but they all kind of start in media res, right? They're just kind of like, here we are with Cleric Chi, and we're in this new situation, and we're going to kind of figure out what's going on. And each one has kind of like a different thematic focus. They have some different traditions that they're pulling on and kind of focusing on. They're stronger in different ways, which is one of the things I like about them. But this one relies on this, basically you don't know that it's not an unreliable narrator, but the situation's unreliable, that their awareness of what's going on is not totally accurate. But you don't get that until so far into the book that I felt like the first half of it was weak until I figured out that there's something weird going on, because they all start in media res. This one starts in media res, and we're just kind of following along, and I'm like, oh, some of these things don't make sense. Some of these things feel like kind of weirdly rushed and like not fleshed out enough. And that reveal that we're in a constructed kind of, I don't know how to say this, but there's some sorcery going on, doesn't come until so late in the book that it made the first 3/4 feel weird to me.
I had a similar experience more because I've read all the other ones and they all have like a structural conceit to them. I was waiting for the penny to drop, and so I found that my knowledge of the other books was making me go look for things within the text and go, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? Oh, is this a hook? Is this a hook? And once it did drop, it was fine. But because it was so long into the book, it made me I was spending more of my attention trying to hunt for sort of structural clues than just being in the narrative.
I think I also I'm developing like an acute, snarky allergic reaction to retellings. And so I was thrown, and maybe this is actually Vo's craft at work. I got so thrown by spotting the quasi Bluebeard thing. In this, I was like, oh yeah, it's a Bluebeard retelling. That's what it is. And that's not the twist. There's a different twist. So like that distracted me. So I don't know, maybe that was good.
The one that surprised me the most was the last one I read, actually, which was the Tusks of Extinction by Ray Naylor. I have previously read The Mountain in the Sea, which I enjoyed. I had a good time with, but not like a completely unalloyed good time. And then I read this one and I was like, he just works better in novella form. It felt tighter. It felt like the balance between plot and ideas was better. It felt more like the two played well together in a way that it felt sometimes like The Mountain and the Sea got a bit too interested in its ideas at the expense of like well-constructed story.
No, I can totally see that.
So it's not the top of my ballot, but it went a lot higher up the list than I was expecting it to, right in at the end, which was a nice surprise.
That's cool. Yeah, no, it is well constructed. It's doing it's doing a classic science fiction thing that I like very, very much, which is like, Naylor's stuff has this sort of thriller adjacent. He often reminds me a little bit of like maybe some of the cyberpunk stuff in a way of just kind of have like two-ish ideas and just like run with them real hard. And I wrote a fairly critical review of The Tusks of Extinction just because I didn't feel like it quite gelled enough around what it was doing specifically with memory, which is something I was really interested in, but it just didn't, I don't know if it didn't have space or just didn't quite have a firm enough point about it. I guess my biggest thing is that, so if people haven't read this, it's about this project in the extremely near future to bring mammoths back from extinction, and I think other Pleistocene creatures. I don't know if they mention any of them, and I just had this sort of like top level suspension of disbelief thing. Why you would be trying to bring back Ice Age creatures when, spoiler, the Ice Age is not coming back. The opposite is happening. That was just such a weird top level thing. I think coupled with the fact that, and this is not Naylor's fault, but I have such growing antipathy and skepticism towards the de-extinction movement because they kind of seem like, they seem like grifters, frankly. I don't know if you've been following any of the like dire wolves and like woolly mice and things like that. But like these are the people that like, not saying he's like arguing for them or like pitching for people to invest in them, but he's like pulling on a lot of that research. And the more I look at that stuff and the more I read what smarter people than me say about it, they're like, it's impossible, it's silly, it's a boondoggle. And that just sort of like ripped away sort of one of the premises for me. I feel like with idea-based science fiction, I personally think it's okay to like engage critically at that idea level. But boy, it's a shame this didn't line up time-wise. We could have got a Vo Naylor double mammoth. Yeah, well.
Yeah, I see what you mean about the not having like a conclusive point to the memory stuff, but I almost felt like that didn't matter for me because there were some really poignant moments sort of sitting in it that didn't have a conclusion really, but that they felt like he captured something that felt really real to me. There's a moment when the protagonist is thinking back to the first time she went home after she left for university and finding this gulf had opened up between her and her mother, and they just didn't understand each other anymore. And that felt really raw in a way that I felt it didn't have a point really, but it felt really effective anyway.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Also, just I will say, like positively on it, I just have a huge thing for novels that attempt to do human-animal consciousness explorations well. So it does definitely get points for me on that one. How can I use human-animal consciousness to get us somewhere else on this list? I don't think it's going to happen. Let's. What do you think of Butcher the Forest? I dug it. I'm really happy to see Muhammad on the list. It's shocking that she hasn't been on here before because she's had so much excellent work coming out at such an incredible rate. I think we really got to call out like Muhammad and Tchaikovsky. I keep saying like the mid-list is dead. There's no prolific authors anymore. And then like Muhammad and Tchaikovsky both churn out like 17 books a year.
I feel like they tag team so that they've each got something coming out within like the next few weeks for the entirety of 2024 at least. I think I read a lot of what Premier Muhammad put out last year, and I don't know if it's because there was kind of an exhaustion of reading a lot of the stuff by the same person, but I liked The Butcher of the Forest. I think I gave it 4 stars. I had a good time, but I'm also a little bit sick of retellings of fairy tale re-evocation things. And I think that kind of played into it for me of like, it was good. I could see what it was doing well. And I really liked how it approached innocence and kind of who gets to be an innocent in an unjust system. I felt was a really good USP that I've not seen done particularly well elsewhere. But it didn't sort of shoot to the top of my OMG, this is amazing kind of feelings.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I really dug it. I think because, as I've said, like I feel like I'm getting an allergy to retellings, but this didn't. This, even though it has like obviously you can see a few fairy tales and grim stories that it's pulling on, it didn't feel like a one-to-one. It just kind of felt like trying to recreate that feeling. And you know, one thing we haven't talked about is like how much horror is running through the lists this year overall, not just in this category, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, that was one of my notes I think I put in.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks it's good because I think the Hugos are better. The more variety, the better. But a selfish part of me is like, oh, but I don't want it because I'm an enormous wuss. I really struggle reading horror because I get very easily scared. And so there's part of me going, guys, it was safe before.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think the parts of The Butcher of the Forest that I liked the most were it felt like it's drawing on, or not drawing on, but almost creating a new kind of cosmic horror. and trying to like express this like really deep, really weird, unsettling kind of horror thing, like not just a monster, but like elder gods, the universe isn't what you think it is kind of horror.
And it was genuinely unsettling, and I did feel uneasy reading it, which, you know, it proves that it did its job really well. But that probably also plays into why I didn't love it.
Yeah, that's fair. And that brings us to the Kingfisher, which was good. It's the most definitely horror of anything on here. I liked it more than I thought I was going to going into it. It also felt, we were talking earlier about that like sequential or episodic thing. It felt like it really, really relies a lot on the first, what was it?
What Moves the Dead?
What Moves the Dead, yeah. Which was also good. But yeah, this felt like more of a chapter in a continuing series than a thing that stands on its own. But I know we're not going to get into that too deeply for moth reasons.
Yeah, I obviously haven't read this one because it contains a thing that I get very unsettled about reading, particularly in horror context. But certainly I was not super in love with the previous one because it felt like it was trying to do too many things at once. And it would make sense to me if this one kind of draws on those many things to kind of, because there's just so much of it there available to draw on.
Yeah, it had this problem that if this were in a television show, I would say this is a good thing, like a pilot, which is that I was way more interested in the characters and their history within this world than with the specific monster of the week that it's about. Because it has this like pretty rich cultural idea of this, is it Galacia, which is like, you can kind of see the countries that it's drawing on influence-wise, but it's like, it's a fictional language, it has its own practices, it's set in the real world, so like it has a relationship with other things going on in Europe, but it has some things about it that are really interesting and unique. And that and the sort of like camaraderie between the main characters was a lot more interesting to me than the supernatural threat that they have to deal with. So again, like in a way, like if you think of this as an entry in an episodic thing, that's almost a positive. But considering it just on its own as a novella, the central supernatural thing was not that interesting to me. So that brings us to The Practice of the Horizon and the Chain by Sofia Samatar.
Banger.
With all due respect to everyone on this list, it feels so ludicrously above the rest that it's a little hard to talk about for me.
I love it. I read it quite a long time ago now. I think I read it before it came out, and I have not stopped loving it in the entire time in between. And I need to go back and reread it because I'm sure I'll find umpteen different things that I didn't spot the first time. But the thing that has really stuck with me is how it approaches class in a way that I find a lot of SFF doesn't approach it. And not just on a very simplistic level of the worker and the ruler, but as a kind of a transmitted thing, something that you can inherit. And it talks about like class mobility and the kind of legacy of class mobility in a really nuanced way in such a tiny book.
Yeah. And is so good at conveying the way that everyone who's not at the very top is constrained, but constrained in different ways. Like there's that moment when you realize that the boy, who is like the lowest on the ladder in terms of power that we've seen here, that he is able to see what's going on much more clearly than the woman, the professor, who is sort of like above him a little bit, but constrained in other ways, and the way that that's shaped her thinking and her time and her energy in ways she doesn't have fully control of. Yeah, really, really good. And just Samatar is not someone who I've usually read to be a didactic writer, but this has a couple really obvious axes that are being ground, and I really, really like that. I don't think this is a novel that is going to age poorly, but it felt very timely. I was reading this right when Columbia in New York was viciously attacking its anti-genocide protesters, and beginning the process of like feeding its students to the police state. And to see this indictment of, how like academic and institutional hypocrisy around inclusion and around equality, or like channeling those energies into ways that just support the system instead of looking at more radical things, and instead of actually looking at like, what do people materially need, what are they materially doing. This is just so clear-eyed and insightful about that, and isn't just it's not just railing against it. It's also like presenting this sort of alternative and showing this like really interesting and fairly ambiguous, what the horizon is and what the practice is are like a lot less clear than what the chain is. Yeah, so good.
And like the ending isn't a tidied up conclusion. It's an ending that is, and then the next step, and there's a gulf of what happens after
Mm-hmm.
that kind of opens up as you finish the book. And I really liked how that was handled.
Mm-hmm. It's becoming a refrain for me, but I keep thinking and also hoping that the Generation Ship novel is dead and then like a good one comes out. So maybe that'll keep being my refrain. But good job on that. All right, we have talked about the novellas pretty long here. Any last thoughts on novella category?
I mean, I really hope that the practice of the Horizon and the Chain wins. I love it. It's beautiful. Sophia Saboteur deserves a Hugo. I I think I want to be madder at the novella shortlist than I am
Mm-hmm.
because they all are actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mad at the tawness of it, but the individual components I cannot bring myself to be mad at.
I'm the exact same way. This list does not make me mad. All these are worthwhile entries. It has just made me think so much about like how do we fix this, and the solution is all small presses need to magically have more money so that they can do more right, like so they can do more marketing and do shipping better and like get things out there better. Offer better discounts to bookstores so that they can carry them more. And that's just I don't know the solution. Like we have things like the spreadsheet of doom. We have reviewers and reviewers, and we have rec lists like push people to hear about this stuff. But it's just hard. And there's kind of like there's one publisher doing science fiction novellas with like a ton of money behind it, and here we are. I don't hate that for these authors. I hope that they got good advances and good royalties and had a good experience getting edited and distributed and marketed by Tor, who have done this well. But it's a bummer, and I don't see a break in it without, I don't know, something else happening.
Yeah, I guess maybe one of the other big publishers breaking in, kind of cracking the door,
Mm-hmm.
is the only thing I can really see that might
Mm-hmm.
shift it. Someone like Orbit or Solaris
Yeah.
or like Hodder, Del Rey, someone like
Yeah.
that. It's too big of a hill for something like Neon Hemlock, like
Yeah.
Luna, like
Right.
Stellarform to climb.
I don't have enough information about this to say anything too informed, but I have been hearing like some interesting rumblings in other parts of the publishing world about smaller presses and indie presses finding ways to consolidate, not necessarily at the ultimate like money level, but at ways to like pool distributing costs and things like that and get out more. And I wonder about things like that because there's so many great small presses and indie presses going right now. But I mean, like I know from like being briefly a book buyer in a bookstore that like those differences in margins, like if who's tours through Macmillan, right? Like those differences in those discounts you can get of like 5, 6, 10% what you get off, like that's huge. Like that's your margin. And if the small presses can't match that, then basically as an indie bookstore, you're deciding like, do I just like do this on a gamble or just sell it at a loss? That's the solution, is to get around that
Mm.
somehow, and it's not at the level of Hugo nominators. So I don't know.
No, I hope.
Yeah, and like I will say like the way the Hugo nomination works, kind of crowdsourced, it's always going to be responsive to marketing. Like that's not a bad thing per se. That's just how it works, and it has been nice to see things like, for example, the Ursula Le Guin Prize, really spotlighting some really cool novellas and other shorter works, not from the usual suspects.
And like I guess that is the boon of juried shortlist. I find the Ignite shortlist is often very good
Yeah,
for similar
yes, totally.
reasons.
Hmm.
And I guess you kind of have to read the Hugo on one side and pick something else, juried on the other to kind of to fill both sides of the scales.
Yeah, no, totally. I think like having at least one other award that you like follow closely and kind of have a relationship with is really a good way to round out your reading list. So, all right, that's novellas. I'm gonna grab a quick drink of water and let's talk novels. Let's talk big stuff. All right, we are back. We are still talking Hugos. We're talking novels now. So this year, the shortlist is Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky, The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley, Service Model, also by some guy named Adrian Tchaikovsky, Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell, A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, and The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. So this is our list. Top level thoughts about the list? What do you think on the whole about this list?
It's an interesting one. So with Nerds of Feather, a couple of us try and predict the shortlist every year.
Okay.
And I got 5 out of 6 right on this one, which
well done.
Is much higher than I normally manage. But I think that says something about how, I try and think of a better word for it, but it's a relatively safe list.
Yeah.
Mostly. Not totally. And the one I didn't predict was double Tchaikovsky.
Mm-hmm.
I think I guessed that it would be the Premier Mohammed
Siege of Burning Grass.
Siege of Burning Grass. Yeah.
Yep.
So but I think that I found it predictable in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think again says that it's a little safer than it might have been, but at the same time, I think for all that it's a little bit safer, The Ministry of Time is a very unusual Hugo book.
Yeah. I was very pleased to see that on here. Yeah, so I hadn't read The Ministry of Time before the shortlist came out, but I'd seen so much kind of buzz about it. I wasn't shocked to see it on here. I am very pleased. I think it is very unusual. I always, when the Hugo lists come out, I'm usually pretty sad about the things that I was really pulling for to be on it that don't make it. And I always kind of know, because either they're a little more obscure, they're not quite the Hugo crowd. Obviously, there's Rakesfall, which is too good for this world. So I'm not at all surprised that Rakesfall did not make it on this list, but I want to call it out that it's awesome and you should read it.
Yeah, it was on my ballot as well. So there were 5 things on my ballot. Sorry, there were 4 things on my ballot that didn't make the final ballot, and Ministry of Time is the only thing I nominated that made it in. But Rakesfall, in our hearts.
Yes, in our hearts forever. Yep. The two that I'm most upset about, and the one I'm only half upset about, and that one is Jared Pekachek's The West Passage. I'm only half upset about it because he is on The Astounding, so he's going to get recognized for the work, and that is the work he's being recognized for. So I feel good about that. But that was hands down the overall best novel I think I read in genre last year, and it was just so immensely fun that I was really hoping it would make its way on here. I know it is hard for first-time authors just with name recognition things, but again, Ministry of Time made it on here, so great. The other one that I am going to be salty about until I die is Seth Dickinson, because I think Exordia is if Exordia is not on this list, what are we doing? What are we doing with the Hugos if that one's not on here? Because it just it's this immensely engaging, philosophical, hard science fiction. It's got alien contact stuff. It's got language stuff. It's got this really, really hard-hitting critique of U.S. imperialism, cool characters, just tons of fun. And it's a Tor novel. And I really thought, because I felt like Trader Barrow is one of those books that was kind of slept on and sort of now acknowledged a little bit as something that a lot of people really liked and was kind of influential in some circles. And I was really hoping Exordia would make it on here, but no dice.
The ones I'm sad about were, so In Universes by Emmett North, which was multiverse, but just really powerful. Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins, which hit me super hard. It's a novel told through a collection of obituaries that manages to be incredibly hopeful and positive in a way that I found completely took me by surprise. And I loved it so much, and I really, really wanted to make it on. And then Private Rights by Gina Armfield is the one that we haven't mentioned. And that one I'm less upset by because it is on the Clark shortlist. So it's getting its day.
My third category of things I'm just kind of bummed out. It has to do just with the safeness. The Eden Robbins is way up there. There was a good handful. There are 4 or 5 books I read last year that were just so immensely fun and fresh feeling and inventive, but did feel approachable. I think Hugo readers, if they read Remember You Will Die, they would love it. I think it's a book that is very approachable, but it's doing something really new in a new way. I was also thinking of things like Scott Gild's Plastic. I don't know if you read that one, which is just this very innovative, strange. Like it has some bits that harken to cyberpunk, but it's doing a lot of different things.
Have you read 381 by Alia Whiteley?
I did. I bounced off that a little bit, but I can see that kind of going in the same bucket of doing really interesting, innovative things.
Like it's doing structure, but I think in a way that is quite accessible.
Yeah, I'm going to be salty about Exordia forever, but more than any one particular book, I'm just sad that there was some really innovative work that I think people would have liked that I wish would have made it on here, but so it goes. But we have Tchaikovsky on here twice. We've got Kingfisher, who has got to be climbing the ranks of overall Hugo noms, right?
I mean, I think the numbers are quite high because hasn't Shauna Maguire got somewhere in the like mid-teens at this point?
I know Maguire, Heinlein, I think Connie Willis. There's probably a few others I can't think of offhand are really high, but just in the last couple of years, Kingfisher has really been racking them up. So what did you think about A Sorceress Comes to Call?
This one's a really tricky one because I love T. Kingfisher's work. I adore particularly the Saint of Steel books. So it's the universe. It's the universe of the White Rat is kind of the larger set of them, and they're kind of fantasy but slightly comedy but slightly romance. They were originally indie published, and I have been much less fond of her more recent stuff that's been trad pubbed. And I think this connects in to some extent to the novellas. Obviously, I've not read the one this year, but the one last year. I kind of feel like the ones of hers that have made the Hugos have felt a little like they've had the kind of the corners sanded off them, the interesting sharp edges that were there when she was writing indie pub stuff seem to be missing. And so I still like it. It still feels like T. Kingfisher. It's still well written. It's still interesting, but it doesn't quite have the bite that I still kind of feel primed to expect from her work. And so I didn't love A Sorceress Comes to Call. I didn't love Nettle and Bone. They were good and they felt like they had the ingredients of something I could love, but something was just a little bit too, I don't know.
Processed maybe, or
Yeah. And the conclusion I feel bound to jump to is being trad pubbed, edited, is someone trying to make it more palatable to a wider market in this way? And this is completely me making assumptions, but I find it a little unsatisfying when some of her early stuff really lands well for me. And so I read A Sorceress Comes to Call when it came out, and I had a good time, but it's also really fallen out of my head since. It didn't have enough hooks to kind of to stick. And I'm wondering if that, as you say, she's been climbing up the charts of long-term Hugo winnings well, nominations rather, and I'm wondering if that name recognition is kind of feeding into it in a way that I want to see her recognized because I love her early work, but it's being recognized for the things that I feel aren't as good, and that's just really frustrating.
Well, I think that's an interesting dynamic when you have a crowdsourced award like the Hugos, and you have most authors are not very prolific, and then you have a few authors that are hyper prolific. There's like a better chance that they're going to ride on name recognition, not necessarily on their best work, kind of depending on when the years fall. So I think that kind of makes sense as an idea. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed A Sorceress Comes to Call. I was bracing a little bit to not like it just based on the description I've read of it, and I'd read a couple other Kingfishers of her past stuff, but none of them had like super grabbed me. But I was pleasantly surprised. Oh, I should also mention that in my book, part of the reason I was bracing is I'm not interested. I'm actually anti-interested in Regency as like a setting. So I was like, oh no, what's happening? But I was very pleasantly surprised with how much I liked it. I think the humor in it worked for me because it wasn't like, I don't know, it wasn't like gurning at the camera. It was a pretty light touch with how the humor worked, and I really dug that. The one thing I will say, I think that kind of makes sense, or maybe a different way maybe I was having a slightly similar reaction to what you were having, was to some extent it felt a little bit to me like an exercise, like put these two things together and see what happens, less than it felt urgently real, if that makes sense, as kind of its own thing.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. And I don't want to sound too harsh on it because I did find it intensely readable. I absolutely consumed it. I think I read it in like a day, maybe 2 days. And I like you, I did find some of the very offhand humor worked.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's a funny writer
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I think more overt humor doesn't tend to land for me. I like dry asides, and she does those very well.
One thing about it that I have that has stuck in my head, like there's probably more we could talk about it. Like if we were diving in to do a longer thing on it, there's probably a lot to talk about with class and how some of the character construction works and how the magic works and things like that. But the one thing I'll say that just is sticking in my head as an interesting thing about it is the extremely carefully crafted ambiguity of the world it's in, where placing it time-wise and geographically is like very, very carefully circumscribed that the ambiguity doesn't jump out at the reader, but it's flagged enough to let you know this is not, well, it's specifically not in England, and it's not at such and such a time in such and such a place. And that was so carefully done. I have been reflecting on that just as like a technique thing, because like I'm a person who gets thrown out and then antagonistic very quickly, like when my suspension of disbelief falls. And this book was like a master fencer, like not letting me, like all the points where I would normally like start feeling like suspension of disbeliefy, it was really good at like, nope, you don't know where this is. You can't apply the critique you think you might apply to this. And leaving just enough like kind of open threads that culturally things made sense, and handling the supernatural elements enough that they characters' reactions to it felt believable and culturally situated without giving us what that culture is. The more I thought about that on a craft level, the more I was impressed with it. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by that.
But it's also, it's not super foregrounded at all. It's like I hadn't that hadn't occurred to me at all when I was reading it, but now you're saying, I'm like, actually, yeah. And I'm holding it in contrast to, I don't know if you read the Natural History of Dragons books by Marie Brennan,
Yes,
where they're doing a similar thing where it's not England, it's not the Victorian period, but they foreground that really, really heavily. And so it's kind of, it's an in-your-face joke. And I think this does it a lot more gently and
yeah.
under the radar. And I think I prefer that.
It's a really hard thing to do. Like all of the cultural cues I'm going to be throwing at you are from a period of history that's been well represented, right? Fictionally and in television and films. But it's not that. Fooled you. It's a fantasy world, right? That's a tricky thing to manage well. And I do think that is major points in Sorceress's favor.
And you have to rely on your readers. You have to have faith in the reader to get what you're cluing. And I tend to approve more of books that have that faith in the reader rather than feeling the need to kind of handhold or like bash them over the head with a point.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to cut a large digression here about fantasy and science fiction and secondary worlds. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. Maybe we might actually come back to it with a few of these titles. But speaking about another highly developed secondary world, let's talk about Taney Cup, which is Robert Jackson Bennett. I want to say that's his first Hugo nom. Is that correct? Oh, nope, I'm wrong. He's been nominated for the series for both the Divine Cities and the Founders trilogy.
That's why I don't remember, because I try to forget that this series exists.
I am right there with you, 100%. I am glad he got recognized for those, because I think those are both very fun. But City of Stairs is one I wish more people would talk about that. But let's talk about the Taney Cup. So I really dug this. For listeners who don't know, this is a fully secondary world, technically fantasy, but it works a lot more like science fiction. It has like this kind of alchemy, bioengineering thing that's like very worked out and very logical, doesn't feel supernatural per se. It's in this kingdom that's occasionally under assault by these sort of giant, enormous sea monster creatures. And the structure of it is basically Watson and Sherlock-esque, a sort of a junior investigative officer who has a senior investigator, detective kind of person. They go around and solve crimes. I really dug this one, mostly because I just think they're fun, and I think Jackson has or Bennett has a flair for kind of cinematic writing that in other writers it would annoy me, but he has a really good job for handling like interstitial scenes well and setting things up well, but then having these kind of like big set pieces that happen like every couple of chapters where something big happens and he describes it well and it's very enjoyable.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like about the Tainted Cup is within those, so it's got those two things. It's got this detective-y thing, and then it's got this or private investigator-ish mystery solving thing, and then this big giant flashy fantasy speculative thing going on. And it's leaving a lot of really ambiguous, odd things politically. Like a big thing hanging over reading The Tainted Cup for me is how fascist is this world? How totalitarian is this world? It is totally in service to a literally monstrous, the rejection of a literally monstrous alien other, and like everything is subordinate to that, right? And like the big crime and the mystery is that it may have like affected the walls, and it's very subtle about it, and I enjoyed how it set that up and again fleshed it out in those two very different parts without feeling, I don't know, discontinuous.
So I also had a very good time with it. And I likewise I enjoyed the thoughtfulness but not like clear cutness of the way that it has approached the politics of the world. And I am hoping that it gets developed more in subsequent books. I assume this is going to be an ongoing series.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the ongoing adventures of so it's interesting you went straight to Holmes and Watson with them because I think they are only superficially Holmes and Watson.
Yeah,
And
that's fair.
if Anna is Holmes, she's Holmes by way of Gregory House.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of other detective traditions that kind of feed into them as well, but I think that they work really well as a partnership in that mode. But yeah, the background world stuff and the kind of there's a lot of underlying theses about political structure that I really want to see develop in the subsequent books because I think there's a lot of potentially interesting ground that they could cover that has been set up. I'm fingers crossed hoping.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, we won't build any of our argument on what might come, but Tainted Cup's fun. Tainted Cup's good. Setting aside some discursions and digressions about Bennett and his work and things he has said online at really unwise proximity to controversies about the Hugos and the WorldCon. Setting that aside, let's talk about the Tchaikovskys. We've got two. We've got two Tchaikovskys, a double Tchaikovsky here. I want to call out that I think the strongest Tchaikovsky novel is not on this list, which is hilarious that you can write that many novels that a well-informed nominating body can pick the two that aren't the best.
I'm assuming I know which one you mean, but at least it is being recognized in best series.
Yes, yeah. I just thought House of Open Wounds is a remarkable achievement. I think the Philosopher Tyrant books are Tchaikovsky firing on all cylinders in a way that is great. And interestingly, like Tchaikovsky is someone who one of the reasons I like his work is I can see the things he's thinking about and the kinds of authors he's pulling on and kind of rhyming with. And I feel like they're integrating a lot better for me in the Philosopher Tyrant books, where I can see some threads in there that are like, this is kind of Pratchett-y, or like this stuff reminds me of other people I like in the New Weird, but they're kind of coming together in this way that feels, just integrated and kind of new. And I really dig it. But we're not going to talk about the Philosopher Tyrants. We're going to talk about, let's talk about Service Model. How did I describe Service Model derisively? I should say I did enjoy it, but it is like basically Wall-E by way of Douglas Adams. I think is not a terrible way to summarize it.
I think that captures it. I didn't like it. I had quite wildly different reactions to the two Tchaikovskys, and for me, the problem was I didn't find it funny. And it is a heavily humor focused book, and if you don't find it funny, you've just got to power through. Especially because for me, it felt like there are little iterations of different jokes, but it has one mega joke, and I don't find the mega joke funny, and so it's constantly elbowing me in the side, going, hey, about this one key thing that specifically, I've talked about this book before, but the thing I struggled with it is information management and how there is information that is blatantly obvious to the reader, and it's meant to be obvious to the reader.
Right.
It's a joke. It is deliberate that the main character does not have access to for a variety of reasons, and that persists through the whole book. And if it had been much less of the book, it probably wouldn't have annoyed me as much. But I found sitting with a character who doesn't know this blindingly obvious thing intensely frustrating. It wasn't funny, it was just enraging. And so it did not land with me at all.
I really think this book's problem is length. I think this could have been a banger of a very short novella or a novelette, because a few taken without everything leading up to it and then like the 300 pages after it, a few of the scenes really did work for me. The kind of, I don't know, the poking at the information age, bureaucratic, weird circles, like that sequence where I'm forgetting the exact details, but where like the robot is going to like be recycled, but the recycling center has been so backed up that they're running it wrong, and like everyone's getting error messages. It, to me, that felt like a very effective satire of the kind of things we've all run into in tech, where like it wants you to click a box that you can't see, or like you need a code sent to your email but doesn't have your email right, and you have to reset your password in this other place and then unlock it with your phone, and then that tells you to go to the wrong place. Those kinds of like, we've built these things that are so complex that no one person knows how to fix them anymore. And they just sort of feed on themselves and get ever more involved and like broken Byzantine all the time. Like that, to me, there were a couple scenes in here that were very funny that way, but it's in this book that just keeps going, and the jokes do not stop, and they don't get funnier as you continue. And so, yeah, I wasn't in love with this, and I think if someone, if you pick this up, I'd say if the first 10 pages don't make you like laugh out loud, take the wiser course of action and run.
100%. I think you're right that there are some very effective scenes in it, but for me it felt like they never got strung together into a novel. They are a selection of vignettes that they needed the connective tissue to turn it into something that was one big coherent thing, other than the connective tissue of the joke that I didn't personally find funny.
I also think this is like, we don't have to keep like dinging this book. I think we've made it clear, but I was just thinking a lot about, I am interested in books that look at what post-human purpose and post-human meaning look like. I'm thinking of like stuff by Greg Egan, even like, have you read like Charlie Strauss's like Neptune's Brood in those?
No, I'm afraid not.
I can't remember. There's a name for like, there's kind of a connected universe of those, but they're like people died out of like very similar to this, kind of like natural causes over time, but all their robots just kept going and like figure out new things to do. But they kind of like play around with what are those new things to do, like kind of at length. But anyways, we don't have to compare this to other stuff. Let's talk about Alien Clay. Let's talk about the other Tchaikovsky on the list.
I really enjoyed Alien Clay. I found it a much funnier book than Service Model, even though it is an entirely dead serious book in concept about a bunch, or well, particularly this one scientist who has been sent to a penal colony on an alien world by an extremely fascist government on Earth. It's a death sentence. He knows it's a death sentence. He's being sent to this work camp in a hostile environment where everything along the way could kill him, and they have an idea that they come back to several times throughout the plot of like acceptable losses of, well, yes, we're sending you out into space, but we expect to lose like 20% of people at this pace and 10% of people in this phase, and it is grim. But this character who is a professor, he's an academic, and he is full of the academic perspective of the bitchy kind of infighting of academia, and there are some really funny asides and dark humor, and the way that he sees the world is full of sort of black comedy as a coping mechanism, and because it feels really rooted in his character, it felt really authentic, like a genuine reaction that someone would have to this impossibly awful situation. And so it really worked for me. And I found he's not a great person, but he is a funny, engaging, not very nice person to kind of ride along with.
No, I really dig when a protagonist can pull off like kind of like cowardly, not that effective, but like still fun to like go along with. This is well done. Yeah, I thought this was great. I am unsurprised this is on the Hugo ballot, and I think it deserves to be there. I think this is a very Hugo-y book. It's a vein of speculative fiction that is a lot less dominant, I think, in the awards list and in the bestsellers for quite a while now, which is just kind of like classic science fiction, like go to a weird alien planet, weird stuff happens. And it's really well done. I'm a huge sucker for give me some weird alien life forms and we have to figure out how to communicate. I'm like, yeah, sold. And the political and sort of academic stuff kind of in a slightly distant way, rhyming a little bit with the practice of the horizon and the chain in terms of thinking about institutions and how their structures percolate or don't upwards and down. But yeah, I really dug it. The humor in it worked for me. I will say I read it before a kind of like Ministry of Truth, like Lysenkoist control over what scientific reality is started being instituted at the highest level of the American government. I don't know if I would find it. I don't know if I'd find it funnier or less funny today to just be like, no, you have this government that is telling the scientists what to find out rather than the scientists saying what they found out. But it's the way it's handled here is well done, and I think makes that, that's such a black and white obvious kind of moral axis of like, does the evil government get to say what the truth is, or do we get to discover what the truth is? That's so like obvious. It was nice that this wasn't like soapboxy about it, right? But that is kind of the point of the book, and that the alienness they've encountered like allows them to offer an unexpected option, which I always dig that.
Like for me, the thing, and this is to some extent speaking to my own context, because I read it a few days ago, and for me, a lot of it felt very gender, because for me, I'm reading it in the wake of the UK court ruling about gender definitions, and so much of it is about specifically the Mandate, which is the fascist government of the world. Explicitly in the book, it talks about them wanting hard binaries. There is a character who is in this penal colony with the professor who is a non-binary character as far as we can tell. They use they pronouns. And the alien world that they're on aggressively rejects sort of classification in rigid structures, in rigid like boundaries, and binary is not a thing that works in this context. And so having, for me, it was echoing a lot with a lot of UK political stuff around gender and gender expression and that kind of stuff. But I think it's vaguely done enough that you can find that kind of connection to a bunch of different things happening in politics in various places at the moment. And I think that is a thing it's done well, is it can draw on those ideas from a bunch of different places.
Yeah, and I mean, I will always support like anything in speculative fiction and science fiction, using the weirdness of the reality of the world as like an anti-totalitarian tactic, right? I don't know if you read, did you read Zach Gillen's piece at Ancillary about specifically weird fiction?
It was really good.
Yeah, it's really good. But coming back to Alien Clay for this discussion, I was thinking about that a little bit and how that's doing this, that like, even though this is not a weird novel, this is a science fiction novel, but that, if you look at the reality of biology on this planet today, it argues against this simplistic moralizing binaries that's being, forced down from above. If you look at how cells work, even in, mammals, much less you start talking about like fungus or bacteria or something like that, like the world is not broken up cleanly into neat boxes and neat categories and neat binaries. And so Alien Clay using that biological, reality as a political point of undercutting like this this false narrative is good. Yeah, love to see it. You love to see it, as they say.
On Tchaikovsky more generally, I just wanted to say it's kind of interesting that he's never made the novel shortlist before, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
He's made novella, and so it's interesting that his first time hitting novel, he's done it twice with two very, very different books. And I will be super, super interested when we get the nomination and voting stats on that to see, did the same people nominate both of them?
Yeah.
Is this just a legacy of British nominators? Is it different people nominating them? How has this happened?
I am nodding so hard. It's wild. The novels are so different. It feels like a person who is like a really big fan of one doesn't feel like they would be a really big fan of the other. But I also don't think that things wind up on the list because people put books they felt mediocre about it, So I don't know. Very curious to see how that shakes out. We should talk about Someone You Could Build a Nest In by John Wiswell, which, if readers are not familiar with, this is it a fantasy? It's kind of a fantasy. It's almost a
horror.
It's really like almost science fictional. There's nothing supernatural. Everything's explained very kind of biologically, but it's in a quasi Renaissance era-ish secondary world.
It's not really dug into.
Do they have guns? They have explosives. I guess we've had explosives for a long time. I'm not going to try to peg this in terms of the quasi-historical period, but it's not modern. It's sort of a fantasy-esque kingdom. It's about a monster who is like a shapeshifter, amorphous, eats people, takes their bones and organs, and then can look like a person and falls in love with somebody. Lots of stuff happens. I've heard it discussed about in the cozy horror/romantasy spectrum. I'm not totally sure if it belongs on either of those. Don't really know. This novel didn't work for me strongly. If you really did like this novel and you've held into the podcast this far, this is the time to tune out. My note that I made a lot in the margins was dire, referring to word choices and dialogue and structural elements. Some of that might even be down to editing. I don't really know. There were a lot of just like choices in here on a line level that I was just like, all the breath was like leaving my body exasperatedly pretty frequently. So that's rough. And that's my reaction. Obviously, a lot of people nominated this did not have that reaction, but for me, it's really hard to look beyond that to what's more. But when I did look beyond that to what's more, that troubled me too.
My main issue was I can get the line level stuff, but I found myself not really focusing on that because the things that really stuck with me that bothered me were the high level, and the crux of what bothered me is you have this setup where you have a monster that eats people. Like, you're in her perspective. She is very blunt. She is very unapologetic about the fact that she eats people because that's how she lives. And you have this setup in which that could be treated as an interesting problem where she's falling in love with a human that her biological drives tell her that she wants to lay her eggs in, which will kill her. And there's so much fertile ground that was probably a bad way of phrasing that, for a bunch of really interesting problems, interpersonal problems, moral problems, and having a story that faced up to this idea of a character that you are meant to sympathize with who literally eats people could have been great. But at every single point where there might be something hard or problematic or uh, something that would have genuinely two sides, the narrative sidesteps the difficulty. And so the monster eats people, but it's okay. Those people are bad people. It's fine. We don't need to handle it. And how the narratively defined bad people are bad, I did not always agree with. I think some of those people did not deserve to be ate, but the narrative does not agree with me. And so the monster kind of gets forgiven. She never seeks forgiveness. She doesn't really ever show any kind of contrition about the people eating. Like, she doesn't want to eat her girlfriend, understandably, but everyone else, she's just like, yeah, it's an annoying person. I want to eat them. And there are some people who are eaten who are written off by the narrative as bad people. One of whom is a child, a child I was reading as being about 6, 7, 8, that kind of age range. And she's a nasty child. She behaves horribly. I just really struggled with a narrative that was like, well, it's okay. This horrible child got eaten. I'm like, no. That's not okay. You've lost me. You've really lost me at this point.
You know Jaws. So the scene when you don't see it, but we learn that the shark has eaten the little boy, and the mother's like bereft, and she comes up and she slaps the guy, which is like, good job, Spielberg. Kill more kids in your movies, Spielberg. Do it. But it would be like, this is like a special cut of that, where after the kid gets eaten, like someone runs up to the camera and is like, hey, we just found out that kid was an asshole. And everyone's like, oh, okay, it's fine then. All good.
And like the mother of the child who is grieving behaves horribly in her grief. And we get to see complicating factors later on that make what she is and how she behaves very different. But in the moment that you see her responding to the death of the child, she gets full vengeance. And this is treated as her being incomprehensibly awful. And it's like, no, her literal child has just got eaten. I extend this woman like a tiny bit of grace, maybe. Or at least a fraction of the grace that is being extended to this people-eating monster that I'm meant to sympathize with.
It's the having it both ways that bugged me. Like, it just like embrace that, like, this is like a non-human monster that eats people, and like make that your protagonist, that's fine. But like wanting to always be justifying and sort of like make it right, it's just very weird to me. And it clashed very weirdly with me with those kind of cozy-esque elements, and like that it's like attempting to do this like very like soft, forgiving thing, but then being like, oh, but that person you can eviscerate horrifically, and that's okay. And like they're like, this same structure, there could be a really interesting, weird, upsetting, like intentionally upsetting, I think, way to approach that it does not. Yeah.
I think that in order to have the sort of cozy, nice, forgiving tone stuff, truly, you have to get through the hard parts to get to them for them to be worthwhile. And the story never feels willing to do the hard parts to get to the nice parts.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that this made me think of actually was one of Foz Meadows' books, A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. And there's a note at the beginning of the book that says that this book deals with various troubling themes, but it all comes good in the end. And I think that that approach, if you'd applied it here, I think this could have been a very powerful book of there's a lot of stuff about abusive family dynamics in it. And I think you could have done something really interesting with that to get it to a place of healing. But because it constantly sidesteps the hard parts, it doesn't actually feel like you get that resolution that it plays off as having at the end.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we need to go on any longer about this.
Sorry.
Obviously, no, I'm not getting you. I know a lot of people really liked it. I'm going to keep thinking about why it bothered me as much as it did. I think your comments here and your review of it that you posted like are really kind of capturing the key thing there of like trying to simultaneously be kind of like feel good and grotesque, horrifying. It almost feels like it's trying to be morally gray, but then spends the entire time slotting people into good or bad in this moralizing way that justifies everything that happens. I don't know. A lot of people liked it. Let's move on. Let's talk about, is this the last one? Kaylee and Bradley?
Yes.
The Ministry of Time. Do you want to go first? Tell me about this
I
book.
loved it.
Cool.
I loved it.
For people who haven't read the book, what's it all about?
So, the story follows a woman in near future Britain. I don't think the date is specified. She works for a nebulous government agency that are doing a project where they rescue people from the moment just before their death in history and bring them into the modern time and try and see if they can get them to integrate. And the protagonist, who is unnamed throughout the entire book, is acting as what's called a bridge, where she has to live with one of these time refugees is a concept that comes up a lot. So one of these time refugees, and she has to help him acclimate to the modern world. The one that she lives with is from a doomed polar expedition, specifically the one in the Terror, which I know the author watched a lot of during lockdown and is where the book came from. And so it's a book about kind of time travel, but also it's a love story because this man pulled from the Victorian world does fall in love with our protagonist, and they kind of have to navigate that and modern Britain and time travel and spy thrillery things. And this book is like 5 different books in a trench coat and yet somehow works.
Doomed Polar Expedition Hive Rise Up. This is such a surprising book for the list. It feels very different than the kinds of things that usually show up on the Hugo. It feels very different than anything else on the list. It is a first novel author, and you're right. The 5 things in a trench coat approach to this works so incredibly well. It's one of those books where like I'm a little upset that like a first time author did this. Maybe started slightly as like fic of the Terror, and then grew into something really really cool.
It did. I went to an author talk. That's absolutely where it came from.
Yeah, and it's so good. And the thing about it, one of the things about it is, looking at my list, and do I mean this? Yeah, more than anything else on the novel list, and despite this being a first-time author, this book felt more adult and mature to me in positive ways. It is not heavy-handed in what it's doing, but it is dealing with issues of institutional racism and, multi-generational like integration. Like even like the romance and the sex stuff are just approached so well and so not like winkingly, but like, handled really, really well and really effectively, in my opinion, combined with a really pretty involved, intricate science fictional setup that I think does a good job of having an architecture of kind of what the big picture is without really spending too much time on it, in terms of, as we go through, we kind of find that there's sort of like multi-level conspiracies. There's stuff, we think it's all about the past, but it turns out it's also about the future. All that stuff is handled really well. There's these intricate levels of, spy thrillery and sort of like bureaucratic tension going on in it. And just all of it done really well.
And it's funny. And it's genuinely funny.
Yeah. Genuinely funny, genuinely sexy, genuinely concerned about empire without, again, not having a soapbox. It doesn't quite know what it wants to say, right? Because it's not quite clear what the solution is to this stuff. And the fact that like the person who's been pulled from the past, from 1847, is that what he is, 47? there are paths for him in the current government, and you can see them going really bad places. Like, it does a really good job of being like, people like are situated in cultures, and cultures are situated in time, and within that sort of like nested level, there are many possibilities, both good and bad, right? Like, this plays to the way that his training in his time and in his era has sort of like situated him to be competent in really interesting ways, right? And have these sort of like virtues and good and attractive things about his character. But also, those can easily go into negative ways. And like, he would totally get into race science. He would totally get into like a nationalistic, jingoistic approach to how we deal with immigration, right? Even though he is himself a kind of immigrant. So it's really good at looking at those complexities and those contradictions and not resolving them neatly, but really having them satisfyingly on the page.
I love how it handles historicity generally. And so we meet some of these other characters drawn from other periods of time as well. And I think the way that she explores all of their different responses to this new context. So one of my favorites is a man pulled from World War One, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He actually acclimates quite well to the modern age because things that he found hard about his life at his time are different in the modern world in ways that he finds parts of himself fit better while also missing his time and struggling in the way that all of the others do. And then there's Margaret, who's pulled from I think Tudor England, it definitely the
Mm-hmm.
17th century, who embraces feminism and
Mm-hmm.
queer culture so hard. And I love Margaret because you have this someone who's immediately getting into fashion, getting into
Mm-hmm.
cinema, getting into like embracing being a lesbian, embracing women having rights,
Mm-hmm.
but she still speaks in the most distinctively non-modern dialect of any of
Mm-hmm.
the other characters. And every single one of them is totally tied to the time and place they came from, even when they change. And I love that. And I think she's done it so well.
So well. Like, Margaret could have so easily been a cartoon caricature, right? And like cheap jokes. But she makes it like she Bradley makes it believable and understandable that like a certain kind of person, a certain kind of spirit, extroverted person from 16 whenever would figure out Tinder while still being from 16 whenever, and like sells that in like this really, like, it is funny, like you're looking at like, oh, this is funny, but also it feels real, it feels grounded. It doesn't feel like a punchline. Yeah, super good. Oh, good job, Ministry of Time. Do you, by the way, random throwing in things, did you happen to know or watch Travelers, the time travel series?
Not come across it.
It had a very short run. I think it was Canada based. It handles time travel really, really well. And I was thinking about it in this because it's doing some similar things with thinking about like repercussions down future timelines. But I won't give any spoilers here. But people, look up Travelers if you haven't heard of it. It's good.
I think that's really interesting as a kind of comparison point because the only criticism I've seen of this book from people who didn't like it was specifically in the time travel elements and it being not. I'm trying to find a way of explaining this that sounds like I'm not making them be bad faith. Um, that they didn't feel that the time travel elements were was as well handled as more traditionally science fictional books would have
Mm,
done, and that were nothing new or nothing special, and that was a sufficient flaw for the book not to be worth being in a science fiction award.
okay. I can kind of see that, and there's a way that I can imagine this book actually pushing the mechanics even further off the page than they are and still working just as well. Because I don't really care that much about like the time travel machine and where it is. It's all the other stuff that works. So I can see that. But I also think it works well in having it contributes it to both the sort of opaque and vaguely malicious way that large government institutions work, and also to this sort of like paranoid, we don't quite know who all the agents and forces are that are moving through this plot, and it has something to do with time, but we don't know what. I think it works well in that way. I would push back and say, you hypothetical detractors.
It's interesting because I read this very soon after it came out, and I've loved it the whole time. I've obviously kind of paid attention to the critical reception because
Hmm.
that's what you do. I obviously read reviews that I disagree with, and I sort of have a think about them and kind of how they fit into my view of the book. And I think the way I land on it is that I like how for this book, time travel is quite a lot of it is about the people and the downstream effects of this technology on humans. And I
Hmm.
think that is still science fictional. That is still an effect of this science fictional idea. but a lot of more traditional science fiction is less fundamentally interested in people. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I am fundamentally fascinated by people. And so it really, really works for me because it's taking this thing that is less traditionally well explored and doing it really well.
Did you happen to read Prophet by Helen MacDonald and Sin Blaquet?
I have not.
So that's two authors who I think it might be Blaquet's first book, and MacDonald is more known for nonfiction like nature and memoir writing. But they did a science fiction book that was it's kind of like an extreme X-Files riff, but very, very, very character driven. I was thinking about I was thinking about that book a lot while reading Ministry of Time, not because they're like thematically similar, but just that taking a level of character focused realism that we don't always see in speculative fiction and applying it to a very speculative setup, which is why I think this worked so great. Yeah, we've gone long talking about the
Mm,
Ministry of Time, but it's good.
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's good to rant about the things we were most struck by on this list, which I think we have. So that's the list. We should probably wrap up because we've been going real good here. Any other kind of like big thoughts about the Hugos as a whole that are relatively concise?
For all that there are some books on here that I don't like, I think to some extent that's a good thing. And I think there are some parts of this that point in a promising direction for things like including more horror. We haven't really touched on for the best novella, but it is a very female and quite author of color shortlist comparatively for if you look at other past year's shortlists. And that, for me, that says good things about who is being, especially because they're all from the same publisher, who is
Mm.
being published
Mm-hmm.
is that saying good things about who is being allowed to put stuff out. And equally, for all that I know there's been an amount of toing and froing about there being two Tchaikovskys on the novel shortlist, there's a part of me that has to go, yeah, but he's British and it's nice to see British people on the
Mm.
shortlist
Mm-hmm.
because that doesn't happen for all that we are the second most nominated nationality after the USA. I'm pretty certain that's right.
Mm-hmm.
I still occasionally be like, yay, it's one of us.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple critiques about the novel shortlist in terms of gender and ethnic background being a little less inclusive than some years, but I also think that on the whole the novel list has been really good for a while now, and I think this is a pretty good spread. It is interesting to see horror coming up so much, and it's interesting to see different kinds of science fiction on here. Like if I look at this is like roughly half and half,
Mhm.
which actually feels like maybe a little more science fiction than the last couple of years. I need to check my stats to actually confirm that.
Yeah, it's been leaning fantasy, I think, for a
Mm-hmm.
while.
But yeah, I don't know the Hugo list as a whole. I think there's a lot of good stuff elsewhere on the list. We didn't talk about it today, but I think the novelette bracket is stacked this year. I was hyper impressed with them, and yeah, there's a lot of good stuff elsewhere on the list.
I'm really interested in a lot of best related work.
Yeah. The best related work. I have an essay coming about what if I had dictatorial powers I would do to the
Ooh.
categories. But the best,
Ooh.
yeah, and well, the best related work this year is such a great example because the problem with the best related work is it was originally kind of intended mostly for book length work, and now it's vying for a few. Like right, we have a book length work of reviews. We have a book length, short book length book of scholarly writing, and we have shorter form writing on here. I just think the best related needs to be two to work. It needs to be a long form and a short form.
We also have like a film length video essay or two film length. I think it's 4 hours.
It is 4 hours. I feel like I still want to call that short form in terms of writing. I don't know. I'd have to look at it, I guess, and think about it more. But I feel like we have seen one of my things. I always want the best related work to be highlighting actual book length writing about it. But when you have someone who has like a really grabby, catchy blog post that is about, especially when it's something that's like about the awards or about fandom, that like more people are going to read because it is, it's 20 minutes instead of hours of reading. It just makes sense that would kind of take over the category. So, anyways, I have thoughts about the best related work. That's not super relevant to our discussion now. Before we get going, because we should wrap this up, I'm I'm already envisioning my editing process with some dismay to keep us to a reasonable time. Before we go, Roseanna, you are nominated for this list. You are a finalist. What else do you want people to know about where they can find your work that has made the Hugo nominating body put you on the ballot?
I still boggle. I was not prepared to be nominated, and I'm still not prepared. Kind of tying into what we've been talking about today, I have my column at the Ancillary Review of Books, which is specifically about small press novellas. And hey, if anyone wants to nominate stuff that's not from Tor next year, have I got some recommendations for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I want to push most. But I still write and review at Nerds. I still write and review on my own blog. I just have lots of opinions. You can find them all on the internet. I have too many opinions.
Thanks so much for walking through this list. This was good. Despite the negative things we've said about some of these works, and despite about the nearly but not totally inevitable controversies that have accrued to the Worldcon, I do think it's an exciting list. I'm looking forward to talking about these more with people. It is just great to have a list to rally around and argue about. So it's been good. Roseanna, thank you again so much for talking about the Hugo novels and novellas with us.
And thank you very much for having me again.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. Thanks to our human transcribers, Kate Dollarhyde and John W.M. Thompson. They are diligently working on getting us caught up on our transcriptions. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Join our Patreon. A couple dollars a month really moves us towards our sustainability and contributor-paying goals. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a couple other goodies in the works. If you're interested in a book we mentioned, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut, and it helps us immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving us a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Blue Sky for periodic skeets, I guess. Did that term stick? Next time, I'm talking to Dr. Andre M. Carrington about Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author. I'm planning to do a couple special episodes on conventions and conferences I'm attending this summer. We'll see how that plays out. But if you want to read ahead, the next book after that on the list is C.J. Cherry's 40,000 in Gehenna, which I'm discussing with Arkady Martine. Check out our website if you want to see what else is coming up. Hope you're reading critically out there. Don't forget to vote in the Hugos if you're registered. And if you're interested in that Hugo for Best Translated work I mentioned in the show, maybe come to the business meeting if you're up for it.
Oh, crumbs, the title's just escaped me.
Oh yeah, what is that?
Hang on, let me...
I said we both talked about this.
Yeah.